welcome back to Techtulia.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. I've been out and about.
But we're super excited to be back here, have a conversation.
People have started complaining. I think if we went long enough that people, like every person I see that listens to podcasts is like, when's the new podcast?
We have a small audience, but very engaged audience.
Yes.
I hope.
No, it was definitely, it felt good.
Yeah.
I was away for several months. I moved to Thailand and was working out there. Went to Vietnam, spent some time in the U.S., but now we're back in Guadalajara, Mexico at our studios. And we have our friends at Q4 Studio providing audio and video.
Yep. And they're doing a phenomenal job.
Phenomenal job. Let's talk about that a little later at the end of the episode. We're going to give a shout out to Q4. I think it's a great story about a young company, entrepreneurship. They just to let you know, we're the first podcast that they had, but now they've expanded to many, many more podcasts in the last year. So podcast industry in Mexico is blowing up. But as far as Q4 goes, we started the trend.
And did I tell you that you didn't meet her, but somebody was here, a listener, and they thanked us for telling them about Tacos Juan.
That validates the whole idea of the podcast, which is just to promote our sponsor, Tacos Juan.
Did you see that they opened all these locations? Have we asked them if we were part of that expansion or something?
As long as there's a closer Taco Juan wherever I am in Guadalajara.
Achievement unlocked.
That is all the compensation I need in addition to unlimited tacos. We're doing a lot of work here for them.
Yeah.
Episode today.
Right.
This is our first episode of the decade, unless you count decades starting in 2021, but that seems dumb. Nobody says the 2020-21s or whatever. It's the 20s.
Yeah.
In Mexico, how do you say the decade?
Década.
No, but like the 20s.
Los 20s.
Los 20s?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not allowed to say 2020 as the year. You got to say
sounds weird.
2020.
2020s.
Yeah.
Los 20s.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. So it's the first episode of the decade, depending on how you count.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to be talking about is predictions for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
We only get to do this once every 10 years. So
exactly.
If you missed this episode, 10 years, you gotta really charge through this one. You're not going to get another chance.
Yeah, and if you've been a regular listener to this podcast, you will see that we like to do a lot of commentary on things that are happening and what people write out there. So we found out, a very prominent VC from New York, Fred Wilson, wrote his 2020 predictions.
So we will just read them. It's a very good list.
It is.
I think it will make us smarter to think about them.
Yep.
But then we'll complain about the things that we think are wrong.
Yeah, there you go. And then he starts with something that is quite interesting from Bill Gates, actually. He says that people tend to overestimate what will happen in a year and underestimate what will happen in a decade, which is quite interesting. Why don't we start with that?
Absolutely true. So I think, we're in the Wiseline offices now, and we started Wiseline almost a decade ago, 6.5 years.
It's far from a decade, but
if we round up. Okay. I think it's always frustrating how little you get done in each year. Each of the 6 years was frustrating in some way. There's a lot of great things that happened, but each of the years was frustrating in some way.
Right.
But I think if you had asked us when we started it, and we said, hey, look, this is what we're going to build, and this is how it's going to do, we'd all be like ecstatic.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only way you can really think about life is by having that longer view. And if you're going to live 80 years, you got to have at least 10-year segments that you're planning for.
And that's what's interesting about this exercise, right? Where if you look at it from like a very interesting point of view, as this fellow human being did, it gives you hope and it gives you an interesting perspective because, again, to the point of you overestimate what will happen in a year, you're too optimistic, but then you underestimate what humanity can achieve in a longer period of time, like a decade.
Good example of that is the we'll go into some of these. I think a lot of these have a lot of great examples of that 10-year thinking, and that's going to be a good theme to look at them in. So things that are going to be much more of a problem in 10 years than you would have expected. Like, when we started talking maybe 10 years ago about, oh man, social media is going to cause problems for politics. Everyone's like, nah, it's overblown.
Yeah.
But now Donald Trump's president, so you're like, whoa, that was a problem.
Exactly.
And unless you think that's good, whatever.
All right.
It's your own business.
Should we jump into them?
Let's do it. Number one.
So he says that the looming climate crisis will be what World War II was to a couple of generations. So this climate crisis will be our biggest challenge for this generation.
So there's two ways to think about that, right? One is that it's like World War II and that it causes like absolute destruction. And then secondarily, it could also be that kind of rallying thing. I think when people think about the 40s, and if you were an American in the 40s, like the big thing we did is we defeated fascism and we saved the world.
Right.
And that's pretty cool. Like to have like an organizing principle.
Yeah.
Obviously, we would hope that climate change over the next 10 years is not as destructive as World War II, but in terms of killing people.
Do you think it will be a unifying factor? So I'm going to get into a bit of a point of view that might seem political, but I don't think it is. I think that similar to World War II, there have been many people that have said some of the social disparities that we're seeing today are very similar to what we saw in World War II. Now, would this fight for climate change unite both the incentives of the have-mores, or how do they call them? Like
the haves
and the have-nots?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you should frame it like that, but what do you think?
I don't know.
Because like you see like this,
so
you see this news like, oh, billionaires will just like go to Mars or buy all of Greenland and forget about the rest of the people. But then you'd see a lot of people with resources, and that's what Fred Wilson says, that a lot of capital will be allocated to solving this issue, both creating more jobs, both creating more wealth for humanity overall, because it can reduce the creation of power, right? Electricity becomes more available. I mean, we've seen how something as available as electricity can do to a society, right?
Yeah. I just read something this morning that sometimes there's those opportunities to leap ahead, and Vietnam had committed by 2030 to having 10% of their power come from renewables.
Right.
They met that goal before the end of 2019.
Nice.
Because the price of solar is coming down so much.
Yeah.
And so for a country like Vietnam that's having a lot of economic growth, to be able to reestablish their economy on solar and renewables is a big opportunity for them, because they never have to make those big investments in coal plants that now China and India, who had invested 10 or 15 years earlier, are having to just write off. Gigantic multi-billion-dollar investments in coal and things like that are being written off. So in terms of, is it going to unite people or tear them apart? I don't know. It's going to cause a certain kind of tension. I think that tension is going to lead people to do things very differently.
Yeah.
I also think that it is going to create alliances where there aren't alliances now, but it's going to create people who are losers. And coal miners in West Virginia, those jobs aren't coming back. Like that's done. Like it's not politically, economically, socially feasible. And that's going to change who owns what and how wealthy people are, and that's always going to be an issue. But I think it will be something that, because it's a global problem, it's going to probably force us to, either through global international trade and technology or through global political institutions, unify a lot more. And I think that's one of the things that the right wing has always pushed back on, is that global warming is just this trick to have us accept a world government. And it's kind of like, well, it's not a trick, but yeah, it's going to do that. Yeah. And you are going to have much more, they have satellites now that can spot methane emissions, which is a major contributor to climate change. And obviously you can do the same thing with CO2. And so I think more and more there's going to be more people in your business unless you build renewable power and you can kind of pull back from making those global pollution. Yeah. If you avoid that, you're going to have a lot more freedom. If your industry depends on creating a lot of carbon, and there's probably other like plastics in the oceans and things like that are kind of like these globally affecting things, or overfishing. Yeah, the oceans are acidifying. Yeah, and the fact that we are forcing ourselves more and more and more towards global institutions that monitor these kinds of side effects of trade and capitalism is probably going to lead to some overshot. Yeah. I think by 2030 we're going to be talking about, oh man, the UN is instituting these taxes. Yeah. Because like cities are going to start to be destroyed in the next 10 years. I was in Bangkok. I was in Ho Chi Minh. Like, those cities are just going to be underwater.
Oh, yeah.
Florida is going to be underwater in
Yeah.
the next 10 or 12 years. I mean, New York was almost destroyed in 2012 when with this little Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about having to build a $100 billion seawall to defend New York.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, this is just going to get worse and worse and worse, and we will see global political institutions to deal with it, and it's just going to get worse over time. So
Yeah.
that's just a fact.
At least in my adulthood, I've seen how the government has tried to, at least in Mexico, do something for the environment in a very inefficient way, right? So they started with like, oh, you should separate your garbage. And then it really didn't make an impact. But then when you see that Oxxos are going to charge you if you want a plastic bag, like, that's change. And that's what I like. Like, lately, people's minds are bombarded with this concept of, we only have one planet. You better take care of it. And it doesn't matter if you understand how this global warming thing works. Everybody is behind the idea of taking care of our planet in a way that I believe it's not been seen in a few years.
I think that's the case. And the young people are on board with ecological conservation, and the old people are going to die. And that's like really probably what's going to take, in addition to a couple cities going underwater.
Yeah.
It's going to be horrible, but next one. Let's go to 2. That one's bumming me out.
Why?
I don't know. It's just to think about these cities underwater just is frustrating. Anyway, let's go.
So
and the
number
polar
2.
bears. Yeah, automation.
Right. So automation will continue to produce a tremendous amount of surplus in consumer goods, and it will define the politics of 2020s. Like, we'll see capitalism, come under scrutiny.
I think that's absolutely the case. And I would, if we want to make some bold statements on our podcast, which I don't want to be held accountable for outside of this podcast, like, look, don't come to my house if you figure out where I live. I think capitalism's over. And here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
So if we go back to Marx, right, I think one of the fundamental criticisms of capitalism is that it alienates the worker from control over their lives.
True.
Right? And essentially here's how it works, right? All organization and work and life is arranged around the factory, for instance, if you're Marx, right? It's 1850 or whatever. And if you don't own the capital, you have no control over the factory, even though the factory is the central point of your town, of your work, of your life. And so fundamentally, the structure of capitalism alienates you from your work, right? And so people see automation coming in, and they say, well, look, if the worker no longer controls the factory, and now the factory doesn't even need the worker because of automation, isn't this going to further alienate the average person? If you talk about, like, it's unfair that certain people have more wealth than other people, like, I don't want as much wealth as Jeff Bezos has.
No.
I mean, he's getting
hacked by the Saudis.
That's a more money, more problems kind of situation.
That's exactly the more money, more problems realized in a very specific way.
Like, at some level, it would be kind of interesting if the head of Saudi Arabia was after you, but I don't want that.
No.
I'm like, I get frustrated and anxious about, like, oh, I think I have a leak in one of my tires. Like, if I got a guy cutting dudes up, who's after me?
Oh yeah.
I don't want that. I don't want that smoke. I'm using kids' lingo now.
Yeah, and then somebody destroying your marriage is because he has.
Yeah,
something against you.
If I got a divorce because the head of Saudi Arabia, I mean, I don't think I have. You know, he had like a girlfriend on the side. He made his own bed, but like, that's like a big problem, right? So it's like when we talk about the divide between the rich and the poor in terms of wealth, I think it misses the point, because it's like, that's actually not the problem. And it's not like Jeff Bezos can get rid of that money. Yeah. This is something I think other people like. Jeff Bezos wants the money because he wants control over Amazon. Right. The fundamental source of the wealth and the use of the wealth is control over his company. The problem is not Jeff Bezos being wealthy. The problem is the average person at Amazon having almost no control over their lives. Right. And Jeff Bezos having so much control over so many people's lives. Got it. Right. And so when you restructure that critique of capitalism, I think it more naturally, rather than talking about wealth and value and all that, it's so fucking confusing. Yeah. If instead you say, is the average person going to be more in control of their lives in the future or less?
Yeah.
Is Jeff Bezos going to have more control over 1 million people's lives or less? And I think that's the interesting question. And when I say capitalism's over, when capital is the main means of organization, then that's capitalism.
Yeah.
If the reason you get out of bed is for capital, and the reason you work at your company is for capital, and all these things, if having capital gives you the ability to control people's lives, that's capitalism. Before capitalism, what we had religion and a monarchy and these kind of spiritual power structures, military power structures, and that was militarism, or you could call it whatever you want. And capitalism is suddenly the guy has $1 billion, and he is the one who determines what everyone else does. So when automation comes, is that going to decrease or increase the average person's control over their lives? And then we can go look at specific examples of that. But I think that's the challenge of capitalism. I don't think we're going to suddenly abandon the free market or anything like that, or global trade. I think what's going to happen is it's going to make less and less sense, and more people will be able to control or organize themselves. Not everyone. Some people and some people won't.
Yeah.
And that's how it's going to be affected.
The way I see it is, this system of capitalism is quite young, right? Like we've only been doing it for 150 years or something?
Yeah.
Or and in a way, we need to evolve it into something that is going to be more beneficial to all fellow human beings. But if you look at history, you always had people that had a lot of power and people that had not so much. I don't think that given our size in society, that you will always have a balance where everybody is totally equal, because it's in human being nature to aspire to do more. And
when you say equal, what do you mean equal? If a husband and a wife technically make the same amount of money,
that's good.
But the husband's physically abusive to the wife and she doesn't have the opportunity to leave the marriage, right?
Yeah.
Well, she's alienated from control over her own life.
Right.
Right? It's not like the husband benefits from being abusive, and the wife certainly doesn't. So it's like, if we think in terms of power and control, if we think about what are the opportunities for self-determination and fulfilling meaningful purposes in our life, if somebody goes off and is on a boat for a year and like saves like 1 million whales and writes a book about it and never receives a dime, are we supposed to imagine that that had no kind of benefit to that person's life? Like so many people like that, it's a fantasy of being a famous scientist or a writer, and it's not the material benefit.
Right.
The tragedy is, and I think if you live in a country like Mexico, there are millions of people who have the ability to be a famous scientist or a famous writer, right? And who are just, they don't have the free time, the access to education.
True.
And because of the structures that just happen to exist under capitalism, which the goal of capitalism is not to liberate human potential.
We're not tapping into it,
Yeah, and so those people are limited. Once you do have that opportunity, I think you're never going to have complete equality in the sense of outcomes or material wealth, but you will. I mean, like
a better version of what we have today.
The goal should be, look, and again, like so many people in the United States focus on the United States, like, oh man, the United States, like, you know, the 1% own this. It's like, I don't care about the United States in terms of you have so many opportunities in the United States compared to the rest of the world. I think the big story, if we're thinking about a decade, obviously, when I just said I don't care about the United States, I care about the United States a lot as a leader and as the source of a lot of the institutions that will be able to liberate people. But the reason the United States is important is because if we build the right things in the United States, it liberates billions of people. I think the cell phone is just like a great example. I don't want to be too tech utopian, but like the fact that there's billions and billions of people who can buy a cell phone for like $25 and have cell phone coverage, that allows people to operate their lives in drastically different ways. That might not bring material wealth instantly, but over time it's going to decrease their alienation from their own opportunity. It's going to mean that they're going to have more control.
We could do a whole podcast episode on that. Like, is tech an equalizer or a gentrificator, right?
Wow. And it's going to be specific. And I think when we go through these transitions, let's say 2020 is this big transitional year, right? Who knows? But let's say it's a transitional year. I think when we have big transitions, it's not so much that things change in how you understand them at the moment, but it's our thinking about things starts to become less important. And the new way of thinking becomes more important. It's like, you know, one of the things we'll talk about here is global trade and things like that and wealth. Do you know any 20-year-old who really cares about having a car? I remember when I was 16, like that was
Right.
the primary focus of my entire life and existence was to have a cool car. And now like kids are like, oh, I'm never getting a car. I don't know how to drive.
Yeah. I think it's a certain population of kids. I think it's also that cars used to be this kind of item of appreciation because they were so difficult to get. I think most kids these days can get access to a car, and that it made it less interesting to them. I think.
Well,
Good
so
level.
have we solved it? Automation?
We had a good discussion, I guess.
What kind of prediction is this? Automation will be important. Like, hey,
So I
Fred, who's going to win the World Series?
No, I think so. I think that what he's saying is that automation and the effects of it will be impacting politics and the rhetoric in 2020.
Yeah, it's old gravity. All right, come on. Make some real predictions.
Come on,
They
respect the guy.
They're going to cure baldness within the next 10 years. Like, just give us some stuff we can work with.
China.
China will emerge as the world's dominant global superpower, leveraging its technical prowess and ability to adapt quickly to changing priorities. I disagree. What do you think?
Me too. I think they will give a lot of other powers a lot of headache. I don't know them and know the culture enough to know that they will be leading. From what I see from the outside, I don't think they have the principles as a culture to become that dominant player.
I agree 100% there. And like when we think of America as a superpower,
Yeah.
America's not the superpower.
No,
It's
culture.
America's culture, which is primarily shared by dozens of other countries.
Yeah.
And so if there is a bipolar world, it's not going to be America versus China.
Right.
It's going to be America and Japan and Europe.
Yep.
And like, I was just in Thailand, right? Like, and this is what I was talking about with Bismarck this morning. I was like, the average old person, if I come to Mexico, and I love old tapatios.
Nice.
They're my favorite people. Like, every time I see some
How old do they need to be?
gray hair.
Okay.
So, like, substantial.
me.
You're not old enough.
Okay.
But, like, 20 years older than you? Yes.
All right.
Because every tapatio saw some terrible stuff at some point in their life.
In the 90s, yeah, of course.
In the 90s. It was bad.
Yeah.
And then now, everything's cool. And they have, like, this peace about them.
That's true.
But they're definitely very Mexican.
Yeah.
Right? In the way that you would
Very
think
proud.
if you're coming from the outside, this is a Mexican person. They have a certain culture, a way
True.
of doing things. They walk very slow. They drive bad.
I agree.
I hope no one look up my address or come there, please. But they're very Mexican, right?
Yeah.
And when I see someone from Jalisco today who's 22, they could just as well live in LA, right? And when I'm in
True.
Thailand, old Thai people or old Vietnamese people, especially like old Vietnamese people, if someone's old enough to have lived during the Vietnam War,
Yeah.
they've seen some shit. And you can see it. Like there's just like a piece about them that are like, I've seen so much worse than this.
Right.
They don't complain about traffic.
Right.
Right. But then you go and you talk to a 22-year-old or a 19-year-old person from Vietnam, and especially if they speak English, they might as well live in Los Angeles.
Right.
Like there is the internet has created a global community.
That's true.
They like Fortnite or whatever
Yeah.
YouTube video.
Yeah.
They like BTS.
Yeah.
And so when China has to become this superpower, it's not over the United States. And I think
Right.
the United States military is much less important as the sustaining factor of this culture.
Yeah.
It's the culture itself and the economic system behind it. It's awesome. Like
China is awesome, but like many, let's call them empires that have existed in the past, they had an influence over culture, over principles, and to some degree over the military. I think they can get the military part okay, the technology part okay. The culture though, I'm not speaking about the Chinese culture as a evolution of a society. I'm speaking about the one imposed by the government, right? Like
Yeah.
the cultural principles that the government is promoting. I don't think many human beings can get behind it.
Yeah, if you look at China in 1980 to China right now, its contact with the United States and its interaction has made it look more and more and more like the United States. And I
True.
think that will continue to be the case. I think American business culture is one of the best in the world. As an example that, when we first started Wiseline in Guadalajara, we had some behavior issues.
Yeah.
And it's not like people were like behaving bad for Mexico. It's that when you take American standards and applied them to Mexico, some people were doing stuff that is like, you guys use some pretty harsh nicknames.
Language, yeah.
You can't go to the United States and call someone like, hey, fatty. But in Mexico,
that's pretty common.
Yeah, you're hey, gordo, and like nobody flips out. It's just like, yeah, he's fat. What?
Yeah.
Like, it's true, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, but who was the winner in that interaction?
Yeah,
it was the American culture, and eventually, HR came in, cleaned the whole thing up, and I think that's a huge benefit to Mexico because you can't call someone chinito. They're not going to like that,
yeah,
right? And that's going to prevent Mexicans from becoming more prominent in countries where that's offensive.
That's true.
But now that they have adopted this, people get mad about political correctness. It's like, no, man. It's like if you were just decent and consider other people's feelings, or at least act in a way that could be mistaken for that, you will be much more successful in business. And that's what's taking over the world. And the fact that it started in the U.S. is a historical. But it's not like China's going to overcome that. There's no way to overcome it.
Yeah.
Right.
So in a way, China will become an important player. We fundamentally disagree that it's not going to be at the level where we will see it.
We're not going to be enslaved by Chinese overlords and their AI cameras. I think it's nonsense.
Agreed. 4, countries will create...
But you never know what can happen in 10 years. In 1 year, maybe not. But in 10 years,
there you go.
They could get good at it.
Countries will create and promote more crypto and currencies to help transform the financial sectors of the world.
I've been following Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was writing my PhD thesis, so I was kind of distractible. It's a boring process, and you just type a bunch. And there was 2 things that interested me that year. One was Minecraft. Was being built by Notch, and it was like he was posting videos every day, and you could watch him like coding it.
Were you following him that close?
Yeah. Man. I was way pre-beta, all that.
You're like a super user of the internet. Like I every time I see somebody do like what you do, I'm like, how do you do that?
You gotta find the sources of the memes. You gotta find the internet.
So you
has
click until you get to
exactly. There's point. It's like a fountain. There's a pipe that all of the internet comes out of, and most people can't find it. You gotta zero down in that. But I was right on top of that pipe.
Okay.
I was seeing the birth of all of the cool internet stuff in 2011.
Nice.
And or 2010 or whenever I was doing this. And the second thing was Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember telling Claire about Bitcoin back then. And then like 8 years later, she was like, why don't you buy Bitcoin back when it cost like 1/10 of a penny? I was like, I don't know. I was writing my thesis. Like everyone told me to focus and finish my thesis. And but like, what is it actually used for aside from money laundering 10 years later?
Right.
Nothing. Like I've never bought anything with Bitcoin. I've never put on a good pair of VR goggles. There's just all these trends that it's like 10 years in.
Yeah.
I should have seen something.
Right.
I should have seen something. And there's nothing. And it's just like, are you going to really bet that the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Because the statement at the beginning of the podcast was 1 year, not much.
Yeah.
10 years, anything's possible.
Right.
Well, it's been 10 years.
That's true.
What happened?
Well,
what's going to happen that hasn't happened yet?
Can we think about it in a different way? Would we see monetary policy change as a result of crypto?
I think that's a much better statement, which is the governments used to be able to get away with a lot of stuff.
Right. That
they're not going to be able to get away with in the future. The controls on money moving around the world, the controls on, there's certain types of things they used to do that they're just not going to be able to get away with because you can do crypto now.
Right.
And because they're going to be sensitive to crypto.
Right.
But, that feels to me like, here's another one that was like kind of like peaked in like 2015 or whatever, is 3D printing.
Right.
Right. I see where everyone's going. Like, wouldn't it be crazy if you could print anything? But it's like, yeah, but then on the other hand, what if I just ordered it off of Amazon and they sent it to me? That's always there's always this other option. And even though 3D printing could do anything, the other options are responding to it and becoming better and better. And so 3D printing has not changed the world the Segway has not changed the world in any way. they're alternatives, but they don't have a disruptive potential. And I don't think Bitcoin will disrupt the current financial system. I think it'll just force, what's the big payment? Like, cross-border payments are going to be so much faster with crypto. But it's like every year, the governments are a lot more lenient and put a lot more effort into their fast payment settlement methods and the cross-border payment settlement methods. And so you're seeing the fees that you have to pay to send money between countries go down. You're seeing fees that you have to transfer money between businesses go down, and the speed at which they get settled going from days to seconds.
Sure.
And so, okay, if that was the whole point of Bitcoin 5 years ago, and all that stuff's been solved. It can't disrupt things faster than they can respond to it. Unlike, the smartphone disrupted everything, but it became big in 3 years, and it's taken 10 for Bitcoin.
I think if you look at the technological promise of crypto, it's pretty cool. I believe that the barrier of entry is too high for the benefit that it provides, and that's one of its biggest challenges, especially for big financial corporations that still continue to dominate the world. I believe that entrepreneurs start doing online banking, new cloud native powered by this technology, we probably see some change, but it's going to take more than 10 years.
I read another analysis of Bitcoin that I thought was spot on, and it definitely agrees with your point with the entrepreneurs. The biggest thing Bitcoin, it's going to come out of Bitcoin, is it'll probably stay worth $200-300 billion, maybe worth $1 trillion in total market cap at one point, but that's not going to, there's so many billions in wealth and savings, and not all of that's liquid. So it's like, as far as the financial system goes, I don't think it ever becomes like a giant thing.
Right.
But there will be some pretty interesting things, which is, number one, you have a generation of, because it's been a big deal for the last 6-7 years. People have really been into it.
Yeah.
But you have a generation of tech entrepreneurs who now really understand the financial industry and payments. They really understand security and crypto. Like cryptography, not crypto money, cryptography. But they've taken a couple things that are generally very useful. And I remember we were talking to Tech de Monterey a couple years, and they were just kind of, what do you think? And they're designing a lot of really innovative, cool new programs. And I was like, crypto is really big right now, but you might get burned in 4 or 5 years where it comes out of style. But if you teach distributed systems,
security,
distributed consensus, security, cryptography, and the math behind that, none of your students are ever going to want a job that they don't have, right? And that would also contribute to Bitcoin. So I think that's probably going to be the biggest result, but it's not as interesting as like completely overturning the monetary system.
This next one is kind of abstract, so let's see if we can unpack it. But it says a decentralized internet will emerge, led initially by decentralized infrastructure services like storage, blah, 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 blah. The emergence of decentralized consumer applications will be slow to take hold, and a killer decentralized consumer app will not emerge until the latter part of the decade.
I think we need to find this one. I agree.
Yeah, so in a way, I believe that he's talking more about like what Jack Dorsey said recently. It's like, if you guys are giving us so much feedback about how we should moderate this thing called Twitter, and it's because this thing called platforms is too difficult to control, we should create protocols instead of platforms. Did you see that? It's kind of an interesting idea, and I've personally been thinking, because like we spoke about platforms. I believe platforms are a magnificent thing.
Episode 4, if you guys have the app
there you
open.
Yeah. And we spoke about them and the power of them, but he's now talking about protocols, and instead of having a single platform that controls all players within that platform, what if many players in a decentralized way through a protocol can interact?
So
what do you think?
I think this is a very similar one to Bitcoin, and it comes from the same people. Oh, platforms is episode 5, excuse me.
Okay.
Comes from the same people, which is we're going to have a decentralized internet. And
we do have one right now from principle.
Anybody can put up an HTML, but if there's a lot of pushback, because if you say are a neo-Nazi and you put up people's home addresses and say go kill these people,
and Google will not find you.
Google will stop you from having search, and Amazon will take you off their cloud. Although Amazon's actually pretty lenient, but like the payment systems will stop processing. You get deplatformed.
True.
And so everyone's like, oh man, this decentralized internet will change everything. It's like, no, because like neo-Nazis are like 0.00001% of Americans. Like they're a tiny group
I really
of people,
hope you get that right.
but they're very noisy. And
True.
the kind of people who would get deplatformed, when they've been deplatformed, they come back and they say, "Oh, we're going to start our new, free speech Gab, or we'll start our new payment." But you know what? You're never gonna your costs and the difficulty of operating are going to make it so hard that you'll never get mass adoption.
Yeah.
And the reason that all of these platforms are so incredible is because 99.99999% of people use them, not because they allow 100% everything. So I think there's this idea when you had the internet that anything would be able to happen.
Yeah.
And what we found is that actually 99.99% of things happening is exactly like 100% in terms of economics. And if that last little bit of friction that can't be allowed on the platform, unless it's some scalable, it's the next iteration in humanity. I think free speech of anybody can post online, that's disruptive. Yeah. Free speech in the ways that a lot of people think that we need this new, completely unmoderated internet. You're talking about like a couple people, and the benefits of platforms and the economics of platforms are so substantial, and the fact that platforms can be controlled by centralized governments are so substantial that I think if something really disruptive started to emerge, the platforms would figure out from their own economic interests about how to.
The one thing that I'm going to say is there's platforms versus a more decentralized, protocol-oriented internet versus whatever. It looks a lot like capitalism and the next wave in the sense of who has power, who has control.
We could come back. And I don't know, how long are we into this episode? Where are we at? 3 minutes until what?
30 minutes.
30 minutes? Oh, we're halfway through. Yeah. You guys are on top for an hour. You guys are on for an hour.
Yeah.
If you're coming from South Guadalajara, from Santa Anita, and you're trying to get to work on Lopez Mateos,
this episode will take the whole route.
You need at least an hour. The traffic's gotten worse. Sorry, guys.
So what do you think? So decentralization of the internet, similar concept to, platform versus protocols.
But you look at what people are kind of taking. It's like, we need a new decentralized internet. Yeah. It's this totalitizing way of thinking.
Right.
It's this idea that there's going to be this new layer that's completely accessible to anyone, that is now free of the constraints. But no, that's just a platform.
Yeah.
It's just a platform by another name. And what you're talking about is people being alienated from power by the platforms.
Yeah.
Right? And so if we go back to this analysis, which I think is like a very Marxist analysis, and I want to do that just so people can kind of when Bernie Sanders gets elected president, comprehend what's going on to themselves, because it's going to be like.
You think so?
Man, it's looking like it. He's leading the polls, but I don't want to date the episode. By the time you guys listen to this, will be Iowa. But let's say that socialist, you have this socialist counterattack to the right wing kind of populism that's happened, right? These big tech companies, they create a bunch of consumer surplus in the sense that I can do things that would have been thousands of dollars for free between AWS or Google searches or my iPhone. I get so much benefit from these technologies that I don't pay for. So in terms of a consumer benefit from a wealth standpoint, the internet is the greatest distributor of value to the average person that's ever existed. Yeah. Aside from maybe roads or the shared genetic code we all have in our DNA, whatever that shared thing, it's a massive, massive value. But the fact that Google controls all search alienates me from being able to form communities and from political movements. And I think when you look at some of the decentralized stuff that has come from neo-Nazis, right, where they want Gab or these kind of censorship-free systems. And in a country like Saudi Arabia, those are probably the good guys.
Yeah.
In a country like the United States, most of the people who are upset about censorship, not as good.
Right.
But if you look at the average person, how it affects them, it's not that they can't say something; it's that they can't organize themselves, or their children never learn how all of these massive systems work because there's 6 engineers at Amazon who know the secret sauce that makes the whole Amazon cloud work. And it's if there's only 6 people like that, that's actually a huge amount of control and alienation where I can't build my own stuff anymore. I can't hack my own phone.
Yeah.
I can't create a website without Google.
No, and I think that's an interesting point, and one where, so I agree with this idea that we'll have a more decentralized internet, but it's going to be a compensation to balance the 2010s in a way that were very platform focused.
Yeah,
right?
And that's what they say right now is that all of like, because people on Twitter or people on Instagram, where's all the cool people now?
Yeah.
In the DMs.
Oh, really?
In the direct messages.
Huh.
They're in the private chats. Like all of the big,
I did not know that.
All the big political like gossip now isn't online. It isn't on Twitter. Like that's just kind of like the end result. That's like the final processed result that finally makes it to the surface of the ocean and gets spread out everywhere. The real drama, because you don't want to like have your drama online. Like you can,
True.
It's a good way to get fired or something. But all the real drama and all the real discourse that's kind of like edgy is all happening in some private Slack.
Wow. Until somebody finds out about it, you get sued, and then
someone
it
releases,
gets disclosed.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like someone releases the entire logs.
Yeah.
And this happened a few years ago to journalists, is that they had this secret journalist Slack, and someone got in, recorded it all, and then blew them up.
That's one of the ideas that I had for a tech company, if you will. What if you were to create a machine, like basically a laptop, for journalists that makes sure that you have privacy and security, but built into the design of the hardware all the way to the software? Because I mean,
I have a comment on that, but we're not going to do it on the podcast today.
Let's
not going to do it on the podcast today. For several reasons. I'll tell you why.
All right.
Plant-based diets will dominate. Number 6. Go ahead.
You.
Plant-based diets will dominate the world by the end of the decade. Eating meat will become a delicacy, much like eating caviar is today. Much of the world's food production will move from farms to laboratories.
I agree with this one.
Here's the thing. 75% of America's cropland, we're talking about Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, so on, right? Grows 2 crops. Corn and ethanol, or corn and soybeans.
Okay.
Right. Now, the corn is the primary crop. The soybeans are there for nitrogen fixation to keep the crops, but they also export them as tofu and stuff. Right. But here's what the corn is used for. Like 38% is used for ethanol.
Really?
For fake gasoline. Because it's farm subsidies. The United States is absolutely insane. So it's supposed to be carbon neutral because it's like, but it's not. Because you have to use a whole bunch of gasoline to harvest the corn and then process it, and so you end up making just as much carbon, almost as burning gasoline. But that's a gigantic percentage.
I did not know that.
And then second is for cows. 36% is for cows. And here's the thing: cows take 10 times more calories to produce a cow than you get out of the meat that you eat from the cow.
Oh yeah, have you seen this? Like
Mexicans get a little more because they eat every part of the cow. First time I went and got tacos with Vidal, like many years ago, he was just like, and this is, and then they started using Spanish words I didn't know, and then he explained what they were. I'm like, I'm even less likely to eat this. Anyway, but if you can go to, I don't know what that is.
The cheek of a cow.
Okay,
it's pretty good.
If you can go to a system where you turn the calories that are produced through that primary kind of agricultural production into something that replaces meat, like Impossible Burger or Beyond Beef, and you do that with 30% loss. Well, that means that for 1 calorie, you need 1.3 calories.
Right.
Versus 1 calorie needing 10 times calories. Right. So if we switched 50% of our food production from eating beef to eating a beef substitute. When you think about burritos and tacos, I'm just talking about the United States. Burritos don't exist in Mexico, except if you're way north. Or hamburgers.
Yeah.
A lot of that meat, people don't really care about the quality of the meat. They just care there's something in there that kind of tastes like a hamburger.
Yeah.
And so once, let's say 50% of beef production or beef consumption is switched there, that's going to be essentially 50% of that corn production. And it's not just the United States that produces corn. You have corn production in Argentina and Brazil that's causing a tremendous amount of deforestation, in Mexico as well. And then secondarily, you have cow pastures, which is the other way that beef takes it up. And that's a primary cause of deforestation.
Yeah, true. Have you seen this company called Bowery? Bowery Farms.
Yeah, that's the stacked farms.
Yeah,
right?
it's amazing.
They
So
do them indoors.
yeah, so I was watching a video about them, and what amazed me because I was watching it under the concept of DevOps and experimentation, was that they run, I believe it was either 1,000 or 10,000 experiments on the crop, right? Like right now, if you want to run an experiment on corn, it will take you one season to experiment with one variable. These guys can experiment 10,000 times with different light conditions, nutrients. So in a way, like farming, and he was speaking about LED lighting being the
LED.
LED. I'm
Not,
sorry.
Yeah.
LED. That's what Mexicans say.
We were at this plate store in is this little like restaurant supply store, and one of the things is like, warning, all of these plates have lead in them. It's like, why is that even this plate you sell? But like all of the enamel, it's like this sells lead. Like, but it's a restaurant supply store, so every restaurant you go to probably has lead in the plates.
Probably.
Like, but plomo.
Plomo, yeah.
Yeah, not LED light.
Sorry, I was talking about LED light. That's true.
I gotta stay focused. We got a few more predictions to get through. We gotta stay focused here.
Yeah, but no. So looking at this startup, right, that is doing experimentation, I just believe that first of all, you cannot do that with animals. It will be both inhumane, as well as probably very expensive and inefficient. Talking about climate change, human beings will become far more aware, and as much as we love meat, we will probably need to give up a little bit on it.
Yeah, and I think that when we go back to that first one of climate change and the environment, eating animals is causing a tremendous amount of climate change, both because of the carbon intensity of production, which is an inefficient thing to produce cows for 20 years. And they produce a bunch of methane, which is another pretty bad climate change chemical. But then it's also huge amounts of forest and land, either deforestation, the soil becomes less productive, and it eventually basically dies. The organisms that make healthy soil die. That causes carbon to be released in the atmosphere. So it's like farming is not good for the environment at the levels we're doing it. And if we could switch the United States from eating a gigantic amount of its calories from, whatever it is, and then make the plants much more productive using this experimentation and stuff. And then also, as I get older, like the older I get, the fewer things I can eat. Like
that's true.
I think both you and I over the last 7, 8 years have like the menu for us, but
it's been reduced.
It's been reduced, but we all. I mean, like if we just immediately switch towards a plant-based diet,
can we just keep the chickens? Are chickens energy efficient?
Chickens are much better than cows.
Okay,
but I
just love eggs.
But it's a horrible reason. So the ethical part we have left out.
Sorry.
But the reason that chickens are so much is because like they harvest chickens after 6 weeks or like something like that. Like
I don't mean chicken to eat poultry. More like to have eggs.
Oh, eggs?
Yeah.
I think eggs are, somewhat ethical.
Oh, there you
but
go.
the thing is, like, it's chemistry. Why can't we just make some like goop
That's
that
true.
tastes like eggs? Like, why? Once we've gotten beef, like eggs can't be that far behind. Anyway,
just don't tell me what it's made of.
That was number 6. Number 7.
Exploration and commercialization of space will be dominated by private companies. Space will get a lot of investment. I guess so. What do you think?
So right now, SpaceX and then
Blue Horizon,
Blue Origin. Is
Origin.
Blue Origin?
Origin.
Origin, yeah. Jeff Bezos' space company are both within 2 years of a fully reusable, like top to bottom. I think SpaceX has primarily reused the first stage, and so we're pretty close to a fully reusable space ship that'll take stuff into space.
Yeah.
Right. And when that happens, the cost of a launch is going to go from something like $100 million a few years ago to the cost of fuel, which is like $1 million.
Nice.
And so 100x reduction. And so anytime a price changes by 100x, you got to expect that the primary, like, there's going to be way more stuff in space.
Right.
The first thing that SpaceX is going to release is this constellation. They're supposed to fire last night. They might do tomorrow, of their 4th launch of this constellation of 30,000 communication satellites.
Nice.
So if we think of Iridium, which was a space-based communication, like basically space-based cell phones, back in the 90s and early 2000s, they had like 160 satellites because it was so expensive to put stuff into space that each satellite had to just do everything. So they're super expensive, super slow. Elon Musk is going to launch 30,000 of these things into space, or Gwen Shotwell, whoever is in charge of SpaceX now, 30,000 of these things into space, and then they're going to be in a very low orbit, not way out at geosynchronous. It's going to be a very low orbit, and then they're going to constantly just burn up in the atmosphere when they're done.
Really?
Every 5 years. So if you think about 30,000, that means every year 6,000 satellites are going to deorbit, which means 20 per day are going to be deorbiting.
Is that going to affect air travel?
It's going to affect astronomy, but they're engineering them. So some satellites they burn up and stuff will hit the ground.
Yeah.
These are going to be engineered for. There's a term they use, but basically all of it will burn up, so nothing will ever get to the ground.
Wow.
Which will probably mean nothing hits a aircraft.
An airplane. Yeah.
But
Hey, sketchy.
20 a day. That's a lot. But that could never happen if you don't take the cost of getting that stuff into space from $100 million a launch down to a much lower number. And so basically that's an entirely new space industry, which is worth potentially tens or hundreds of billions of dollars a year in worldwide communication.
But is it exploiting the power of ever-present data communication channels or what?
Yeah, they actually say that you think about we already have cell phone service. Yeah. I really want to go to space. Well, when you look at the amount of money that traders in London will pay for data from New York, which is like some number of microseconds, milliseconds. I should know this. I'm a physicist, I guess. But they will pay for 50% faster. They will put down a line that goes straighter. So instead of going kind of like crooked, they will pay for an entirely new fiber optic line on the surface on the bed of the ocean, just to go slightly faster from London to New York, so they can make financial trades based on New York information.
Right,
a few milliseconds faster.
Okay,
and they use a very expensive type of fiber optic, which is hollow inside. Right, because when light goes through glass, it slows down. That's the index of refraction. So by being hollow inside, the light goes slightly faster.
Is it reflecting on the shell?
So instead of being inside of the glass the whole time, it's mostly reflecting in the open air part of the thing, right? So they go through all this expense. Turns out, when you have a very low Earth orbit for your satellite, you can just shoot it up to the satellite. The satellite shoots it through empty space all the way over to London, and then hits another satellite, and then shoots it down to the ground. Turns out that's way faster than the fastest communication fiber optics. Yeah. And so there's already going to be these interesting things, in addition to the fact that you can have super fast internet anywhere in the world, because these satellites are just going to be anywhere.
You can just point your antenna.
And so just that one application, I think, is going to massively change how global communications work. It might be something where you suddenly get much better internet at your house because you use this SpaceX, or it might be one of these things where it just forces the existing incumbents.
Do you think telcos will disappear as a result of that?
No, they'll probably just stop screwing us over so mad, and they'll just be run better. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so it's like, if you can buy Elon Musk's 100 megabytes per second from Elon Musk or Gwynne Shotwell for $50 a month, and then your telco's like, well, we're charging you $100 a month for 50 megabytes, to say, no, thank you. And so necessarily it will cause the market to reset.
Because still, one of the disadvantages of satellites, I just in my poor understanding of it, like if it's very cloudy, it's going to be a problem, right?
Yeah, they use different bands of radio frequencies. So water kind of gets absorbed by certain bands, but there's windows. Oh, nice. And so you use those. I'm sure they've thought of this. But yeah, people like satellite TV, when it's rainy outside, it sucks. So. Yeah. Advantages, disadvantages. But I think when we look farther forward, and probably outside of the span of the next 10 years, there's a tremendous amount of cool stuff that you could do in space. Nice. Like, imagine, so you know how hard it is to build a nuclear factory. Yeah. A nuclear plant. Let's say you wanted to make a million tons of steel. So you need the raw materials, and then you need a lot of energy to produce the coke and then do all the melting of the steel. I don't know exactly how it works. But imagine you had a nuclear plant where the radiation didn't matter.
In space?
In space. You're out in the asteroid belt somewhere.
Will you have a tether to
what?
Will you have a cable running down to Earth?
No. You're just going to produce. Let's say you wanted to build the Death Star, right? All right. You want to build the Death Star, which would be a good idea, American government. You want to stay on top of China, get on that Death Star. I mean, really, it's got a lot of advantages offensively.
But as
So
a
you
defense
need
mechanism.
Yeah, as an offensive mechanism. So you need to make like lots of steel for this thing.
Okay.
It's like this giant space station out in space that sends missiles and blows up cities or whatever. If you could harvest the raw materials, the carbon and the iron and whatever for the steel, and then you could build a giant space factory where you could just have uranium freely, just going nuts. There's no chance of a meltdown. You could just just put a bunch of uranium in a ball, and every time you want to add more uranium, you just kind of shoot some at it. You have a little mist of uranium that you spray at it, and this thing could just go nuts. And there's no health hazards. You're 100 million miles from the closest human. It's all done by robots. It's
interesting.
I think there's just things like this that we're not thinking about.
Yeah.
Where you could basically just take an entire asteroid, and with robots and these just giant unlimited uranium, because these asteroids are made out of pure uranium sometimes, all these heavy metals, not pure,
so
but
you think
huge
harvesting
amounts.
the power of the metals within asteroids?
You can imagine within 30, 40 years, between automation, cheap access to space, and some just space-based heavy industry, that you would have you would completely end all material constraints for things like carbon, steel and stuff like that. You could have industries in space that just have no limitation. There's all of the metals and stuff like that sunk to the middle of the Earth because it's liquid, right? They're just available right on the surface of these asteroids. You just go scoop them up, and then there's no...
But they need to be on the path to Earth.
Well, then you could, shoot them back down using... I mean, there's propellant and stuff like that, but...
You're the physicist, so...
Yeah, I'm just saying, you could make these industries in space that have there's no environment in space.
That's quite interesting. And for the people that don't know, Matt is a PhD in physics, so I definitely trust him with everything that he says around space.
The trick is it'll take you longer to prove me wrong than it's worth to you.
I'm not.
And so I'll act like I'm right, and you'll have to accept it.
Nice. Number 8, mass surveillance by governments and corporations will become normal and expected this decade. Privacy. The biggest consumer of technology says of this decade will be in the area of privacy. I completely agree.
This is coming back to your thing, which is we need hardware and software that are basically secure cryptographically
from the get-go.
And
by design.
The stuff that we have right now, just to use Jeff Bezos, got his phone hacked in WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Mohammed bin Salman, I won't use his I won't call him Mohammed bin Salman on the show. I'll just not say that. That's apoptosis. He hacked Jeff Bezos by sending him a WhatsApp message.
I believe it was only by asking his number and sending his WhatsApp.
So he sends him this. His phone, WhatsApp gets it, immediately downloads it, and hacks his whole phone. And he's saying, and the UN saying, that it sent all of his personal data, which potentially included enough information for them to figure out about his affair and then do some research and organize this stuff getting leaked to the National Enquirer. Jeff Bezos has $100 billion, or at least he did. Now he doesn't. His wife has some of that, but or his ex-wife. But it's you think about Donald Trump, the stuff Donald Trump has done in his life. Dude is still using his iPhone every day.
His private personal iPhone, yeah. Which is probably easier to hack than Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, because Jeff Bezos has I'm sure the world's best security team at Amazon.
Apparently not.
And Donald Trump, God, no, there's no security, right? And so what worries me is that at the big level, these people are being hacked left and right. Why are the Republicans so... guys, you have the impeachment trial. Just knife them. Just impeach them, prosecute them, take them out of the political equation. Everyone will forget about it probably by the time of the election.
Yeah.
Just do it. Why don't they do it? Does somebody have stuff on them? This is real Joe Rogan shit. But man, think about it. We're all just monkeys, bro. We're all just monkeys. That's Joe Rogan. Anyway, so yeah, I think not just mass surveillance, but individual surveillance
Yeah, I think there will be an opportunity. Not an app.
Scary.
I think there's not an app, a consumer app that will help you with this. I think there's consumer devices that will help you with this.
I think it's a huge market, and the stuff that's happening to Jeff Bezos now is just going to continue to happen and continue to happen. Imagine an AI that figures out what porn you've looked at and then blackmails you automatically for Bitcoin. Like the fact that hasn't happened yet, like everybody. And it's just going to release everybody's
the F.
Right?
Where did that come from?
I'm golden. I'm going to be totally fine because I don't look at anything bad ever. And so I'm fine. But I know a lot of people get anxious when you say that and it shows something about them. Yeah. No, but like I think stuff like this is going to just, how would it go away? It's just going to get worse. In 10 years, it's going to be worse and worse and worse. And I think Apple right now is probably leading the wave in terms of security, in terms of locking down the access to apps, because it makes sense for them.
Yeah.
And companies like Google and Facebook are probably going to face the biggest economic hurdles there.
Yeah.
Because their whole business is about knowing everything about you.
Exactly.
And for them to continue to operate on these ecosystems, the ecosystems have to remain insecure.
I personally
Apple, I think, is going to make it secure.
I agree. I personally switched. I mostly use Apple products, but I was using Chrome, and just because I knew how much data they were leaking on me, I completely went to Safari, even though I was far more productive on Chrome. I've been using Chrome for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
Or sorry, 2010. I'm sorry, I don't know how long.
Well, and it's your job as a CTO to be highly secure, right? If you're handling customer information and things like that, I mean, these systems are intrinsically insecure, and who could buy your data? And it's like, if you go to a company's website and you're in finance, right? And some hedge fund can buy your search history.
Yeah.
And you're say a corporate officer, and you have been shown that you're going to a company that you might acquire quite a bit.
Yeah.
That stuff is it's probably happening now.
Yeah. That's
right.
True.
Like there hedge funds and these different financial bettors. They used to take pictures of people at the airport, following where corporate jets are going. You don't think they've already tried to either use hacking or just use the publicly available data and placing cookies on different websites to determine which acquisitions are going to happen? I mean, those would be the first things you would expect, and then you can see more and more nefarious stuff. And I think with the stuff like what happened to Jeff Bezos, that's a huge black eye for Facebook. You know, you have Instagram pictures getting leaked. Oh, yeah. You have WhatsApp, and Mark Zuckerberg, I think, realizes that this kind of security stuff, because he keeps talking about, the future is all about private chat, and they need to find different ways of monetizing people other than just selling what their interests are to whoever pays them on the internet. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, personally, I think Facebook is done, but they're not going to be done for a good while. I think it's done because who runs Facebook is done. As a company, they will be around. Personal point of view.
Unless they want to buy from Wise.
We will finally move on from the baby boomers dominating the conversation, number 9, in the U.S. and around the world, and millennials and Gen Z will be running many institutions by the end of the decade.
Wow, what
That's not a prediction.
Old people will die and young people will get older. Well done. I mean, I guess it takes...
Sorry, yeah. That was a filler.
Everyone's like, oh man, when will the Donald Trump era... I don't know. It's probably like a certain number of McDonald's hamburgers away from solving itself. Like, it's just going to wrap itself all up because it's like 78 years old and looks like... a sack of shit. I'm sorry.
But he has a point. Sorry,
he's gonna die.
I think Fred has a point. I think that we're seeing younger and younger people in the economic leadership world, right, as well as the government world, isn't it? Aren't we seeing younger senators and
in Europe you have younger and younger people, and I think that's going to feed into a lot of the trends that came earlier.
Yeah,
which is more environmentalism, less focus on cars and the things that baby boomers valued above everything, because it's not a big deal to have a car anymore. But what is a big deal is that you have a cool apartment in a trendy neighborhood and you have to walk everywhere, right? And so as people's, as the leadership changes and people's economic power changes, naturally the kinds of things that capitalism will produce and our current political systems produce. I don't know, man. This bores me, though.
Let's go to number 10.
Old people are going to stop being in charge.
No,
Yeah.
so what I'm trying to make sense of it, right? But what I believe is the point of a new generation moving into power earlier than expected.
Is
right?
it early? And then maybe in like a kind of a wave.
Yeah.
I don't really see it though. What is that one? For every season, turn. It's just Ecclesiastes or something like that. Like,
Is that a song?
ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It's like it's such an aphorism. It was in the Bible. Nothing new under the sun.
All right.
Anyway,
Continued advancements in genetics will produce massive wins this decade. Fertility, cancer, reproduction, everything will change in genetics, and we'll find new interesting ways to fight diseases, but it will get into the moral and ethical realm.
I've had a few friends who've had trouble conceiving because I'm at that age where all your friends are like having babies and stuff. And so if you've had trouble conceiving, and they go get the in vitro and all this stuff, you know what I'm talking about? And it went from being like a last resort,
right?
Like just because I want to get pregnant, and the level of genetic testing and selection that you get with these things now, it actually kind of sounds like just like the better option.
Yeah. So instead of just doing it in a traditional way, you go and actually engineer your kid?
Yeah, and okay, that just probably says a lot about our culture that it's like, you don't have to sex anymore. You totally don't even need to do that.
What was this?
That's the old way.
Have you seen this movie where Sylvester Stallone is this guy that gets cryogenic, whatever?
Demolition Man.
Is it?
And they don't have sex.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah. I don't know if that became a big hit in Mexico, but in the United States, it's...
I like that movie.
It's like definitely a huge classic. Taco Bell is the only restaurant. And then he had sex with Sandra Bullock by like...
Yeah.
They do this weird thing where they put on a helmet or something like that. And they have like a light show, and it's very weird.
It's very weird. I agree. We deviated from the point, but I agree. So I completely agree. I don't know about the sex creation of kids part, but I'm very excited about fixing major diseases, especially when they're scary as the ones that are popping up right now.
Here's something to think about. Yeah, like obviously like cancers and stuff. They're getting way better at reducing cancer mortality.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting stuff. Like, good job, medicine. We pay enough, right? Anyway, something to think about though is there's a lot of IQ science now with Trump.
What do you mean?
Where basically they take all these statistics and they prove somehow that like, oh, look, that this race has 6 points lower IQ than this other race and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, but if you take lead out of pipes, then suddenly your IQ goes up by 15 points. And, the average like white American, what their IQ was in 1900? There's 107 now or 106 now on average, right? It was like 90.
Okay.
And like, if you grow up by a freeway, you're stupider and stuff. So there's all these like pollution effects and educational effects that just make it very hard for IQ to be like some kind of racially determined thing because, if you grow up in a society that encourages that, you're going to get better at the tests that, measure your ability to do math and stuff you've just been practicing your whole life. I used to teach SATs, and they said like, oh, you can't study for the SATs. But then I would get paid a whole bunch to teach students SATs, and their scores would go up like a huge amount after I told them how to not cheat, but like game the test.
Right.
How to answer, how to make sure you fill in the bubbles. If you can eliminate 2 answers, then definitely fill in a bubble and guess. And all of these techniques would just increase your score. And then you talk about pollution and environment and what was their first language and stuff. But let's just imagine, beyond all of that, that in 10 years, they create one of these genetic things, either before you're born, while you're an embryo, or the pill they can give you that just like, oh yeah, it turns out there's like this one gene that produces this polymer or whatever. I don't know what I'm bad at protein or whatever. That just makes you stupid. Like there's just one thing. And the smart people have less of it, and the stupid people have a lot of it. And we give you this pill, it changes your DNA using some virus that's in the pill or whatever, and then you're just not stupid anymore. And everybody has 150 IQ in 20 years.
We will be very talkative. And then...
Can you imagine how many podcasts, though? So, that is the segue to our last topic. That's our top 10. Thank you, Fred Wilson.
And I have to say, like, I think we got... When we started this episode, we believed we would do a little bit of commentary. Evidently, we disagree with some of the points, but we have to say, like, we do respect what this author has written. We just wanted to give our own perspective.
Yeah, my top 10 things for 2020 would have been like the video games that are coming out this year, and then like the Marvel, like Black Panther's coming out in 2021. Yeah, Bobby Shmurda gets out of prison this year. Like that's my predictions. Yeah. So this is way better than I would have done. Our last topic was Q4 Studios, which we promote regularly on the show. We did a little update. So Lalo's in the studio, and so we had this idea like a long time ago that we did not want to produce our own podcast.
Yep.
Because it's a pain.
Yeah.
Right? And we wouldn't do a great job at it. And there was like Anchor, which we wanted to use.
Yeah,
and
we use Anchor.
And we use Anchor, and it helped a lot. But we were like, what if we just did production? And the idea was if we just found a studio and started doing podcasts with them, then eventually they would find other podcasts to do. Yeah. And then instead of us having, because at the beginning it was a lot of like, well, this is what we want, and we were finding equipment, and it was a little work on our part. But now Q4 Studios has like tons, 6 or 7 podcasts already, and it's growing pretty quickly. And this has become like a bigger part of your recording business. They do music and other types of recording, but it's becoming like a really fast growing part of the Q4 Studios business. And it's just awesome. So now we're in Guadalajara and we want to do a podcast, or we have a friend that wants to do a podcast. Yeah. We just give them the WhatsApp, and then boom, they're doing 10 episodes of podcasting. Nice. So my friend Sylvia, she's like, Matt, you do a podcast. Give me some advice. I was just call Q4 Studios.
It's easy.
And so I just like that. Number one, I like personally that I had this idea that we should let's just find a studio and then make them the podcast studio. Yeah. And then it totally worked. You guys have done a great job at Q4. And then second, it's just kind of like, these are the type of things that in Guadalajara make it better to be down here. Yeah. I don't, not better than anywhere else, but the fact that this exists, and if somebody wants to do a podcast, so we have a couple podcasts that have started at Wiseline. Yeah. Doing a DevOps podcast that you're using for recruiting and to just get the whole team here kind of more aligned about best practices and things like that. As if you're stuck in traffic, you can just get better at your job, or you can learn about a new place to work or something like that. So it was very cool to just take something that was a lot of, when we were first thinking about doing a podcast, it was kind of like stressful, and we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to do it or distribute it.
Scary.
We didn't have video. And then suddenly, a couple of years later, Q4 Studios is here, and we're just like, oh, you want to do like a pretty awesome, people have given us compliments on the production and the sound and the level of sophistication. And it goes from being something that would take a huge amount of work to something where you just call Lalo. And the more customers you have, the better the equipment gets, and the less it costs per person for that equipment, because it's just people utilizing it and stuff. So I think it's a great entrepreneur story. Congratulations to you guys. Yeah. You've done a great job. And we really look forward to 50, 100 podcasts. Yeah. And then once the brain pills come,
brain pills?
Everyone does the podcast.
There you go.
When you have the things that make you smart. Nice. But everyone's smart. Which, 2030, everyone's going to be smart.
Nice. I like that.
That's the prediction.
I like that prediction.
Or everyone will have podcasts.
In 2030, Q4 will be doing 50 times the number of podcasts.
It'll be the new NBC. All shows will be Q4.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it.
It'll be Disney. Disney will acquire Q4. How about that? Disney. Q4 has a lot of content. a lot of content. All right. Thank you for coming back with us. Yeah. At Techtulia. We do appreciate it when you tell us that you listen to the show, because we see the analytics, but when we know who are actually those people,
we get very excited.
And we come and we record. Second thing is, if you have an idea for the show, or if you want to comment on something we said, we are thirsty. Like, we will, anything you send us. We got the Twitter, which the DMs are open. You can send us the emails, Matt at Techtulia.org.
.org, yeah.
And then Vidal at Techtulia.org. And just send us your ideas or comments, or if you want to come on the show. Yeah. Screw it. It's a podcast, whatever.
Let's do it.
See you next time.
Thank you.